Marcus Thompson sat in his old pickup truck outside the emergency room entrance, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. The pain in his chest had started 3 hours ago while he was fixing his neighbor's fence. At first, he thought it was just another muscle strain from the physical work. After all, at 52 years old and carrying the weight of 20 years in the Army, his body often reminded him of battles both foreign and domestic. But this pain was different. It felt like someone was squeezing his heart with an iron fist. And the pressure kept getting worse. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool October morning in small-town Nebraska. His left arm felt numb, and breathing became more difficult with each passing minute. Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. He had faced enemy fire, roadside bombs, and situations that would have broken most people. But right now, sitting in his truck, he felt more scared than he had ever felt in combat. This wasn't an enemy he could see or fight. This was his own body turning against him. He finally forced himself to get out of the truck and walk through the automatic doors of Riverside General Hospital. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, and the antiseptic smell hit him immediately. A young nurse at the front desk looked up from her computer screen as he approached. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, noticing his pale complexion and the way he held his chest. "I think I might be having a heart attack," Marcus said quietly, trying not to cause alarm. "The pain started a few hours ago, and it's getting worse." The nurse immediately stood up and grabbed a wheelchair. "Let's get you back to a room right away," she said, her training kicking in. She wheeled him through a set of double doors into the emergency department. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was just finishing up with another patient when the nurse brought Marcus in. She was in her mid-30s, efficient, and had been working at Riverside General for 8 years. She quickly assessed Marcus, taking his vital signs and asking about his symptoms. "Mr. Thompson, your blood pressure is elevated, and based on what you're describing, we need to run some tests immediately," she said, already moving to order an EKG and blood work. "Have you had any heart problems before?" Enwin yeffed. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, wincing as another wave of pain hit him. "But my father died of a heart attack when he was 55. I'm 52 now." Dr. Walsh nodded and continued her examination. The EKG results came back within minutes, and her expression grew serious. The readings showed clear signs of cardiac distress. She immediately ordered additional tests and began preparing for what looked like it could be a significant heart attack. "Mr. Thompson, I need to get you to our cardiac unit immediately," she said. "You're having a heart attack, and we need to act fast." But then everything came to a sudden stop. A woman in a business suit appeared at the doorway of the examination room. She was Linda Harrison, the hospital's insurance verification coordinator, and she carried a clipboard and wore the expression of someone who dealt with unpleasant news on a daily basis. "Dr. Walsh, I need to speak with you about Mr. Thompson's case," Linda said, her voice professional but cold. Dr. Walsh stepped outside the room with Linda, leaving Marcus alone with his growing fear and pain. Through the thin walls, he could hear parts of their conversation, and what he heard made his blood run cold. "His insurance has been suspended," Linda explained. "There's an issue with his Veterans Affairs coverage. Apparently, there was some paperwork problem with his disability rating, and his benefits have been temporarily suspended pending review. The system shows he has no current coverage." "But this is a medical emergency," Dr. Walsh protested. "He's having an active heart attack. We can't just turn him away." "Hospital policy is clear," Linda replied firmly. "For non-emergent cases, where insurance can't be verified, we need payment up front or guarantees of payment. The cardiac procedures he needs could cost upwards of $100,000. This is emergent," Dr. Walsh said, her voice rising slightly. "He could die." Linda's voice remained steady and bureaucratic. "The hospital board has been very clear about our financial policies. We've had too many cases where we provided expensive care and never received payment. If we make exceptions, word gets out, and we become a charity hospital. We simply can't afford that." Marcus felt like the room was spinning. He had served his country for 20 years, had been wounded twice in combat, and had always been told that his medical care would be taken care of through the VA system. But somehow, some paperwork issue meant that at the moment he needed help the most, the system was failing him. Dr. Walsh came back into the room, and Marcus could see the conflict in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, there's been a complication with your insurance verification. The administration is requiring that we get payment authorization before we can proceed with the cardiac procedures you need." Marcus felt anger rising through his pain. "Ma'am, I served 20 years in the Army. I was wounded twice defending this country. I've always had my medical coverage through the VA. There must be some mistake. I believe you, and I want to help you, Doctor," Walsh said quietly. "But the hospital administration has policies that tie my hands. They're saying that without current insurance verification or payment guarantees, they can't authorize the expensive procedures." "How much are we talking about?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would be far beyond his means. The cardiac catheterization, possible stent placement, and hospitalization could easily run between $80,000 and $120,000. "Doctor," Walsh explained, "even if we could set up a payment plan, they want a significant portion up front." Marcus closed his eyes and tried to think. He lived on his military pension and disability payments, which were modest. His small house was paid off, but he had maybe $8,000 in savings. His ex-wife had taken half of everything in their divorce 5 years ago, including his retirement savings. There was no way he could come up with the money the hospital wanted. "What if I just leave and go to the VA hospital in Omaha?" he asked. "That's 3 hours away, Doctor," Walsh said gently. "In your current condition, I don't think you'd make it. And honestly, I'm not even sure you should leave this room right now." Marcus looked around the sterile emergency room and felt a crushing sense of abandonment. Here he was, a man who had given 20 years of his life to serve his country, lying on a hospital bed during a heart attack, being told that he couldn't receive life-saving treatment because of a paperwork problem and hospital policies. Linda Harrison returned to the room with more paperwork. "Mr. Thompson, I've been trying to reach someone at the VA to verify your coverage, but it's Saturday afternoon, and the offices are closed. The earliest I can get verification is Monday morning." "Ma'am, with respect, I might not live until Monday morning," Marcus said, his voice weak but determined. "I understand your frustration," Linda replied, her tone suggesting that she really didn't understand at all. "But the hospital has to protect itself financially. We've had too many cases of people claiming military service or insurance coverage that turned out to be false. We simply can't take that risk anymore." Dr. Walsh stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. This man is having a heart attack right now. Every minute we delay treatment increases his risk of permanent heart damage or death." "Dr. Walsh, please remember that you're an employee of this hospital," Linda said firmly. "The board of directors has made it very clear that financial policies must be followed, even in difficult situations. If you proceed without authorization, you could face disciplinary action, including termination." Marcus watched this exchange and realized that Dr. Walsh was fighting for him, but that her hands were tied by the very institution she worked for. He also realized that his life was hanging in the balance, while bureaucrats argued about money and policies. The pain in his chest was getting worse, and he was finding it harder to breathe. He reached into his wallet with shaking hands and pulled out his military ID card and a business card that he always carried. The business card belonged to Colonel James Mitchell, his former commanding officer, who had served with him in Afghanistan. "Dr. Walsh," Marcus said quietly, "could you please call this number? Tell Colonel Mitchell that Sergeant Thompson needs help. Tell him I'm at Riverside General Hospital, and they won't treat me." Dr. Walsh looked at the card and then at Marcus. She could see that he was getting worse by the minute. "I'll make the call," she said. Stepping out of the room, Linda Harrison looked disapproving. "Mr. Thompson, calling people won't change the hospital's policies. We need payment authorization, not phone calls." Marcus looked at her with eyes that had seen combat and loss, and brotherhood that she could never understand. "Ma'am, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand what it means to serve, or what it means to have brothers who would die for you. That phone call might mean more than all your policies and paperwork. 20 minutes had passed since Marcus had arrived at the hospital, and his condition was clearly deteriorating. Dr. Walsh had made the phone call to Colonel Mitchell, though she wasn't entirely sure what a retired colonel could do from wherever he was. The response she got surprised her. "Doctor, I need you to keep Marcus stable for just a few more minutes," Colonel Mitchell had said, his voice urgent and commanding. "Help is on the way, and it's coming from the highest levels. Don't let that hospital discharge him or give up on him. That man saved my life in Afghanistan, and I'm not going to let him die because of some bureaucratic nonsense." "Doctor." Walsh had no idea what the colonel meant by help from the highest levels, but something in his voice told her to take him seriously. She returned to Marcus's room to find him struggling even more with breathing and the chest pain becoming unbearable. "Marcus, I made the call," she said. "Your colonel is working on something. He said to keep you stable for just a few more minutes." Linda Harrison was still in the room, growing more agitated by the minute. "Dr. Walsh, I've spoken with the hospital administrator, and he's demanding that we either get payment authorization or discharge the patient. We simply cannot continue to provide expensive care without financial guarantees. Then the administrator can come down here and explain to a dying veteran why his hospital policies are more important than human life," Dr. Walsh said, her patience finally exhausted. Marcus smiled weakly despite his pain. "Doc, you remind me of the medics I served with. They never gave up on us, no matter what." Outside in the parking lot, several people had noticed something unusual. A man in a pickup truck had been sitting there for the last few minutes, speaking urgently into a cell phone. He appeared to be agitated and kept looking up at the sky. 2 nurses on their break had also stepped outside and were wondering what he was looking at. Inside the emergency room, the tension was building. Linda Harrison had returned with the hospital administrator, a thin man in his 50s named Robert Stevens. He looked like exactly what he was, a businessman who saw hospitals as profit centers rather than places of healing. "Dr. Walsh, I understand your concerns about this patient," Stevens said, "but we have a responsibility to the financial health of this hospital. We simply cannot continue to provide expensive cardiac care without payment guarantees. If we make exceptions, we'll go bankrupt." "Mr. Stevens, this man served our country for 20 years. Doctor," Walsh replied, "he's having a heart attack right now. How do you sleep at night knowing you're willing to let a veteran die over money? Doctor, your job is to provide medical care within the constraints of hospital policy and financial reality." Stevens said coldly, "If you're not comfortable with that, perhaps you should consider working elsewhere." Marcus listened to this exchange and felt a familiar anger building inside him. It was the same anger he had felt when politicians sent soldiers into battle without proper equipment, or when bureaucrats made decisions that affected soldiers' lives without understanding the consequences. But this time, it was his own life hanging in the balance. The chest pain was becoming unbearable, and Marcus was starting to feel lightheaded. He knew that time was running out, and he began to wonder if this was how his story would end. Not in combat defending his country, but in a hospital bed, denied care because of paperwork and policies. But somewhere in the distance, barely audible at first, came the sound that would change everything. It was a sound Marcus recognized from his years of military service, the distinctive whop, whop, whop of helicopter rotors approaching, and it was getting louder by the second. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder and more distinct, causing everyone in the emergency room to stop what they were doing. Patients, nurses, and doctors all turned toward the windows, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. In small-town Nebraska, helicopters were rare except for the occasional medical transport or crop dusting season. Dr. Walsh looked at Marcus, whose eyes had suddenly brightened despite his deteriorating condition. "Do you know something about this?" she asked. Marcus managed a weak smile. "Doc, when you serve in the military, you learn that your brothers never leave you behind." Colonel Mitchell apparently took that lesson to heart. Outside, the hospital parking lot was becoming the center of unexpected activity. The helicopter sound was now directly overhead, and hospital security guards were running outside to see what was happening. Through the emergency room windows, they could see a large military helicopter circling the hospital, apparently looking for a place to land. Hospital Administrator Robert Stevens burst into the emergency room, his face red with anger and confusion. "What in the hell is going on here? Why is there a military helicopter circling our hospital?" Linda Harrison looked just as confused as everyone else. "I have no idea, Mr. Stevens. This patient made some phone call to a colonel, but I can't imagine how that would result in this." Dr. Walsh was monitoring Marcus's vital signs, which were continuing to worsen. "Mr. Stevens, whatever is happening outside, this patient needs immediate cardiac intervention. His condition is critical." "Not without payment authorization," Stevens insisted, even as the sound of the helicopter grew louder. "I don't care if the entire Air Force shows up. Hospital policy is hospital policy." But the helicopter wasn't just circling anymore. The pilot had apparently found a suitable landing spot in the large parking lot in front of the hospital. Patients and staff were gathering at the windows to watch as a large military transport helicopter settled down onto the asphalt, its rotors creating a windstorm that sent debris flying in all directions. The side door of the helicopter slid open, and several figures in military uniforms jumped out. Leading them was a man in his late 50s wearing the uniform of a full colonel. His name tape read Mitchell, and his bearing was that of someone accustomed to command and getting things done. Behind him came a medical team, a military doctor, 2 combat medics, and what appeared to be a mobile cardiac unit. Colonel James Mitchell had not forgotten his promise to never leave a soldier behind. When Dr. Walsh had called him about Marcus Thompson being denied medical care, he had immediately made a series of phone calls that activated a network of military personnel, veterans, and supporters that stretched from Nebraska to the Pentagon. His first call had been to General Patricia Rodriguez at Offutt Air Force Base, just outside Omaha. When he explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "Jim, we've got a medical helicopter and cardiac team that can be airborne in 15 minutes. This is exactly the kind of situation where we step in and take care of our own." His second call had been to the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Omaha, where Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief of cardiology, was preparing to leave for the weekend. When she heard about the situation, she immediately canceled her plans. "Colonel, I'll have a full cardiac team ready to receive Sergeant Thompson within the hour. Don't worry about insurance or authorization. We'll handle that later." But Mitchell knew that waiting for normal transport could cost Marcus his life. That's when he made his most important call. To a contact he had in the office of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Within 30 minutes, the full weight of the federal government was being brought to bear on one small hospital in Nebraska. Inside the emergency room, chaos was beginning to unfold. Hospital security didn't know how to handle a military landing in their parking lot. Several nurses and doctors were trying to see what was happening outside, and patients were asking questions that no one could answer. Stevens was on his cell phone, apparently trying to reach someone in authority who could help him understand what was happening. Linda Harrison stood frozen, still clutching her clipboard, as if her insurance verification forms could somehow make sense of the situation. Dr. Walsh continued to focus on Marcus, but she could see that his condition was becoming critical. "Marcus, I don't know what your colonel friend did, but you need to hang in there. Your blood pressure is dropping, and your heart rhythm is becoming irregular." Marcus nodded weakly. "Doc, James Mitchell is the best officer I ever served under. If he said help was coming, then help is coming. That man doesn't make promises he can't keep." The automatic doors of the emergency room suddenly burst open, and Colonel Mitchell strode in, followed by his medical team. He was carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had commanded troops in combat and wasn't about to be intimidated by hospital administrators. "I'm Colonel James Mitchell, United States Army," he announced to the room. "I'm here for Sergeant Marcus Thompson." "Where is he?" Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "Colonel, I'm Dr. Walsh, and I've been treating Sergeant Thompson. He's in critical condition with what appears to be a significant heart attack. We've been trying to get authorization for cardiac procedures, but there have been insurance issues." Mitchell's eyes hardened as he looked around the room and saw the faces of hospital staff who clearly knew more about the insurance issues than they were letting on. "Doctor, let me be very clear. Sergeant Thompson is now under military medical authority. We're prepared to transport him immediately to a fully equipped cardiac facility. Stevens stepped forward, his face red with anger and confusion. Now wait just a minute. This is a civilian hospital, and we don't recognize any military authority here. This patient came to our facility, and he's subject to our policies and procedures. Colonel Mitchell turned to face Stevens, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. And you are? Robert Stevens, hospital administrator. And I'm telling you that you have no authority to remove our patient without proper discharge procedures and payment arrangements. Mitchell smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had dealt with bureaucrats before and knew exactly how to handle them. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Mr. Stevens, let me introduce you to some people. He dialed a number and put the call on speaker. General Rodriguez, this is Colonel Mitchell. I'm at Riverside General Hospital with Sergeant Thompson, and I'm standing next to Mr. Robert Stevens, the hospital administrator. He seems to think he has authority to prevent us from providing medical care to a veteran in crisis. A woman's voice came through the phone, clear and authoritative. Mr. Stevens, this is General Patricia Rodriguez, commanding officer of Offutt Air Force Base. Let me explain something to you very clearly. Sergeant Thompson is now under emergency military medical authority. Any attempt to prevent his treatment or transport will be considered interference with federal operations and could result in federal charges being filed against you and your hospital. Stevens looked like he had been hit by a truck. General, I don't understand. This is a civilian matter. We have policies. Mr. Stevens, the general's voice cut him off. Your policies are irrelevant when they conflict with our responsibility to care for veterans in medical emergencies. Now, are you going to cooperate? Or do I need to explain this situation to a federal judge? Linda Harrison, who had been quietly observing this exchange, suddenly found her voice. But what about payment? Who's responsible for the costs? We can't just write off expensive medical procedures. Colonel Mitchell looked at her with the expression of someone who had seen combat and had little patience for people who put paperwork ahead of human life. Ma'am, the United States government will be responsible for all costs related to Sergeant Thompson's care. The Veterans Affairs Department has already authorized whatever treatment is necessary. Dr. Walsh had been listening to this exchange while continuing to monitor Marcus, and she could see that his condition was continuing to deteriorate. Colonel, we need to move quickly. His heart rhythm is becoming more unstable. The military medical team immediately went to work. Captain Lisa Morrison, a cardiac specialist who had served 3 tours in combat zones, quickly examined Marcus and reviewed his test results. Sergeant, we're going to get you the care you need. Our helicopter has a full mobile cardiac unit, and we can start treatment immediately during transport. Marcus looked up at Colonel Mitchell with tears in his eyes. Sir, I can't believe you did this. I didn't expect. I hoped, but Mitchell knelt down beside the gurney and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus, you saved my life in Afghanistan when that IED went off near our convoy. You carried me 2 miles to safety when I couldn't walk. Did you think I would let you die in a hospital parking lot because of some paperwork problem? The military medical team was now moving with practiced efficiency. They had Marcus connected to their portable cardiac monitors and had started advanced life support measures. Dr. Morrison was preparing medications that could help stabilize his heart rhythm during transport. Stevens was still trying to assert some kind of authority. I need to see proper documentation before we discharge this patient. There are liability issues, transfer agreements, insurance verification. General Rodriguez's voice came through the phone again. Mr. Stevens, let me be absolutely clear. You have 30 seconds to step aside and allow our medical team to transport this veteran, or I will have federal marshals at your hospital within the hour to arrest you for obstruction of justice and interference with federal operations. The fight went out of Stevens immediately. He stepped back and watched as the military team prepared to move Marcus. Linda Harrison was frantically making notes on her clipboard, apparently trying to document everything for the hospital's legal protection. Dr. Walsh approached Colonel Mitchell as they prepared to move Marcus. Colonel, I want you to know that I've been fighting to get him proper care since he arrived. The insurance issues weren't medical decisions. They were administrative policies that tied my hands. Mitchell nodded. Doctor, I could see that you were advocating for Marcus. That's exactly what a good physician should do. Thank you for taking care of him until we could get here. As they prepared to move Marcus to the helicopter, he looked around the emergency room one more time. His eyes fell on Stevens and Harrison, the two people who had been willing to let him die rather than bend their policies. Mr. Stevens, Marcus said weakly, I hope you never find yourself in a situation where your life depends on the compassion of strangers. Because if you do, I hope they treat you better than you treated me. The military team moved Marcus quickly through the hospital corridors and out to the waiting helicopter. Dr. Morrison and her medics continued to work on him as they loaded him into the aircraft, which was equipped with sophisticated cardiac monitoring and treatment equipment. Colonel Mitchell paused at the emergency room doors and turned back to Stevens. Mr. Stevens, you should know that this incident will be reported to the appropriate authorities. The Veterans Affairs Department takes a very dim view of hospitals that deny care to veterans in emergency situations. Colonel. Wait. Stevens called out, suddenly realizing the potential consequences. Perhaps we can work something out. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Mitchell's expression remained cold. The only misunderstanding, Mr. Stevens, was thinking that your hospital policies were more important than a veteran's life. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a moral failure. As the helicopter lifted off from the hospital parking lot, Marcus looked down at Riverside General Hospital through the aircraft window. In a strange way, he felt sorry for the people who had been willing to let him die. They would have to live with the knowledge of what they had almost done, while he would live to see another day because of the brotherhood of people who understood what service and sacrifice really meant. The helicopter turned toward Omaha, where a full cardiac team was waiting to save Marcus Thompson's life. Behind them, in the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital, Robert Stevens and Linda Harrison stood, surrounded by medical equipment and insurance forms, finally understanding that some things in life are more important than policies and procedures. But the most important lesson was still to come, and it would arrive at the same time as the follow-up phone call that Colonel Mitchell had promised to make to the Veterans Affairs Department, the State Health Department, and several congressional offices. The real consequences of their actions were just beginning. The flight to the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Omaha took exactly 18 minutes. During those 18 minutes, Dr. Morrison and her team worked to stabilize Marcus's heart rhythm and blood pressure while the helicopter cut through the Nebraska sky at maximum speed. The mobile cardiac unit in the aircraft was equipped with everything needed to keep a heart attack patient alive during transport. Sergeant Thompson, stay with me, Dr. Morrison said as she monitored his vital signs. We're almost there, and we have the best cardiac team in the region waiting for you. Marcus tried to focus on her voice, but the pain and medication were making everything seem distant and strange. He could hear the helicopter rotors above him and feel the slight vibration of the aircraft, and somehow that reminded him of being transported after being wounded in Afghanistan. The difference was that this time, he wasn't being evacuated from enemy territory. He was being rescued from his own country's healthcare system. At the VA Medical Center, Dr. Sarah Chen had assembled her complete cardiac team on a Saturday afternoon. Word had spread quickly through the facility about the emergency transport coming in and what had happened at Riverside General Hospital. Veterans Affairs medical centers across the country operated with a different philosophy than many civilian hospitals. Their primary mission was caring for veterans, not generating profits. People, we have a veteran coming in who was denied life-saving cardiac care at a civilian facility, Dr. Chen told her team as they prepared for Marcus's arrival. He's been having an active heart attack for over an hour now, and every minute counts. We're going to give him the absolute best care we can provide. The helicopter landed on the hospital's helipad, and Marcus was immediately rushed into the cardiac catheterization laboratory. Dr. Chen and her team went to work with the efficiency that comes from years of treating combat veterans who had survived battlefield injuries only to face different battles with their health later in life. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the VA facility, Marcus was undergoing emergency cardiac catheterization. The procedure revealed that he had a complete blockage in his left anterior descending artery. the vessel that cardiologists often call the widowmaker, because of how quickly it can kill when blocked. "We need to get a stent in there immediately, doctor," Chen said as she worked to open the blocked artery. "He's lucky to be alive. Another hour of delay, and we probably would have lost him." The procedure took 90 minutes, during which Dr. Chen's team successfully opened the blocked artery and placed 2 stents to keep it open. Marcus's heart rhythm gradually stabilized, and his blood pressure improved as blood flow was restored to the damaged heart muscle. While Marcus was in surgery, Colonel Mitchell was making good on his promise to ensure that what happened at Riverside General Hospital wouldn't happen to other veterans. His first call was to the Veterans Affairs Department's Office of Inspector General, where he filed a formal complaint about the denial of emergency care to a veteran. His second call was to Congressman David Walsh, who served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. The congressman's office immediately opened an investigation into Riverside General Hospital's policies regarding veteran care and emergency treatment. His third call was to the Nebraska State Health Department, which had the authority to investigate hospitals that violated emergency treatment laws. Under federal law, hospitals that receive Medicare funding are required to provide emergency medical screening and stabilization regardless of the patient's ability to pay. But perhaps the most important call Colonel Mitchell made was to Sarah Martinez, a reporter for the Omaha World-Herald who specialized in veterans issues. When she heard the story, she immediately began investigating similar cases across the state and region. Back at Riverside General Hospital, the aftermath of the helicopter incident was just beginning. Within 2 hours of Marcus's transport, the hospital received its first official inquiry, a call from the state health department demanding immediate documentation of the hospital's emergency treatment policies and the specific circumstances of Marcus Thompson's case. Robert Stevens was now facing the reality that his cost-cutting policies might have legal consequences. The Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act required hospitals to provide emergency care regardless of payment ability, and denying treatment to a veteran having a heart attack was exactly the kind of violation that could result in severe penalties. Linda Harrison was frantically trying to reconstruct the paperwork trail, but the documentation clearly showed that the hospital had been aware that Marcus was having a heart attack and had still refused treatment based solely on insurance verification issues. Dr. Walsh, meanwhile, was dealing with her own moral crisis. She had taken an oath to, first, do no harm, but hospital policies had prevented her from providing life-saving care to a veteran. She began documenting everything that had happened, knowing that she might be called to testify about the incident. 3 days after the helicopter rescue, Marcus woke up in the cardiac recovery unit at the VA Medical Center. Colonel Mitchell was sitting in a chair beside his bed, reading a newspaper. When he saw that Marcus was awake, he smiled and folded the paper. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Sergeant," Mitchell said. "You gave us quite a scare there." Marcus tried to speak but found his throat was dry and his voice weak. "Sir, what happened? I remember the pain, and the hospital, and then the helicopter." "You had what they call a massive heart attack," Mitchell explained. "The artery that supplies the front wall of your heart was completely blocked. Dr. Chen and her team had to perform emergency surgery to save your life." "And the hospital? Riverside General?" Mitchell's expression grew serious. "Let's just say that their policies are under review by several federal and state agencies. The story has also made the news, and they're dealing with some very uncomfortable publicity." Marcus tried to sit up but felt weak and dizzy. "I still can't believe they were willing to let me die over paperwork. Unfortunately, you're not the first veteran this has happened to," Mitchell said. "But if we have anything to say about it, you'll be the last one at that particular hospital." Over the next week, as Marcus recovered from his surgery, the story of his helicopter rescue spread across social media and news outlets. The image of a military helicopter landing in a hospital parking lot to rescue a veteran who had been denied care struck a nerve with people across the country. The Omaha World-Herald's investigation revealed that Riverside General Hospital had denied emergency care to at least 3 other veterans in the previous 2 years, all due to insurance verification issues. The hospital's policy of requiring payment guarantees before providing expensive emergency procedures was found to be in violation of federal law. Within 2 weeks, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced that they were launching a formal investigation into Riverside General Hospital's compliance with emergency treatment requirements. The hospital's Medicare provider agreement, which represented millions of dollars in annual revenue, was now at risk. Robert Stevens found himself facing congressional hearings, state health department sanctions, and a federal investigation. The hospital's board of directors, faced with the potential loss of Medicare funding, decided that new leadership was needed. Stevens was asked to resign, along with Linda Harrison. Dr. Walsh, meanwhile, became an advocate for policy changes that would prevent similar situations. She testified before the state health department about the pressures that hospital administrators put on physicians to consider financial factors when making medical decisions. 1 month after his heart attack, Marcus was back home in his small Nebraska town, recovering well from his surgery. The blocked arteries had been successfully opened, and his heart function was improving with cardiac rehabilitation and medication. Colonel Mitchell visited him regularly, and they often talked about their time in Afghanistan and the brotherhood that had ultimately saved Marcus's life. But they also talked about the broader implications of what had happened. "Marcus, what you went through shouldn't happen to any veteran," Mitchell said during one visit. "But maybe some good will come out of it. The publicity has led to policy changes at hospitals across the state." Indeed, the Nebraska Hospital Association had issued new guidelines to all member hospitals about treating veterans in emergency situations. The guidelines emphasized that veterans with VA coverage should be treated first, and that insurance verification should happen after emergency care, not before. The Veterans Affairs Department also announced new policies to help veterans navigate civilian hospital systems when VA facilities weren't immediately available. They established a 24-hour hotline that could immediately verify veteran status and coverage, preventing future incidents like Marcus's. 6 months after the helicopter rescue, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Walsh knocked on his door on a Saturday afternoon, looking nervous but determined. "Sergeant Thompson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened at the hospital." Marcus invited her in and offered her coffee. He could see that she was struggling with something. "Doctor, you tried to help me that day," Marcus said. "You were fighting for me when the administrators were worried about money. I don't have any hard feelings toward you." Dr. Walsh shook her head. "But I should have done more. I should have treated you regardless of what the administrators said. I took an oath to put patients first, and I let hospital policies override that oath." Marcus studied her face and could see the genuine remorse there. "Doc, you were in an impossible situation. The system was broken. Not your judgment." "That's not good enough, Doctor," Walsh said. "I've been thinking about this for months, and I've decided to make some changes. I've resigned from Riverside General, and I'm going to work at the VA Medical Center. I want to spend the rest of my career taking care of veterans who have served our country." Marcus smiled and shook her hand. "Doc, that's the best news I've heard in a long time. Veterans need physicians who understand what service means." 1 year after the helicopter rescue, Marcus was invited to speak at a conference on veterans' health care. He told his story to an audience of hospital administrators, physicians, and veterans advocates from across the country. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," he told the audience. "But it took a helicopter landing in a hospital parking lot to get people's attention. How many veterans have died because they couldn't get that helicopter?" His speech led to additional policy changes at the federal level. Congress passed legislation requiring hospitals that receive federal funding to have specific protocols for treating veterans in emergency situations. The law also established penalties for hospitals that deny emergency care to veterans due to insurance verification delays. Marcus also became an advocate for veterans' healthcare rights, working with organizations across Nebraska and beyond to ensure that veterans received the care they had earned through their service. The friendship between Marcus and Colonel Mitchell, which had been forged in combat and strengthened by crisis, continued to grow. They established a foundation that helped veterans navigate healthcare systems and provided emergency assistance for veterans facing medical crises. 5 years after the helicopter rescue, Riverside General Hospital had been completely transformed. Under new leadership, it had become a model for veteran-friendly healthcare, establishing partnerships with the VA Medical Center and implementing policies that put patient care ahead of financial considerations. Marcus often drove past the hospital during his weekly trips to town, and he would sometimes stop and look at the parking lot where the helicopter had landed. It reminded him that even in the darkest moments, when systems fail and bureaucracy triumphs over humanity, there are still people who will risk everything to do what's right. The helicopter that rescued Marcus had long since returned to Offutt Air Force Base, but the impact of that 18-minute flight continued to ripple outward. It had changed hospital policies, federal law, and most importantly, it had saved lives. Marcus Thompson lived another 23 years after his heart attack, long enough to see his grandchildren graduate from college and to know that his story had made a difference for other veterans. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 75, his funeral was attended by hundreds of veterans, healthcare workers, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by his story. Colonel Mitchell, who had become a lifelong friend, spoke at the funeral about the true meaning of "leave no one behind." He explained that it wasn't just a military motto, it was a promise that Americans make to each other, especially to those who have served their country. The helicopter rescue had lasted only 18 minutes, but its legacy would continue forever. Because sometimes, when all the normal systems fail, it takes extraordinary people doing extraordinary things to remind us of what we owe each other as human beings. And sometimes, it takes the sound of helicopter rotors in the sky to remind us that no one, especially those who have served their country, should ever be left behind.